Why is it that the more a woman looks soft, fragile, and tender, the more power she often holds over those who love her? Why do so many men give everything, loyalty, success, even their soul, only to be discarded the moment they become fully available? Friedrich Nietzsche didn't speak from bitterness. He spoke from brutal observation. And what he saw was this: most women do not crave greatness in a man. They crave the thrill of conquering him. This truth is uncomfortable. It doesn't fit modern ideals. It shatters illusions of romantic equality. That's why no one dares to say it. But Nietzsche did, in his own language, in his own raw philosophy. And today we will go deeper into that shadow, not to hate, but to understand the primal forces that govern desire, dominance, and rejection. Because once you see her true nature through Nietzsche's eyes, you'll never chase love the same way again. The illusion ends here. What she truly seeks in a man, most men believe that being good is enough, that if they're kind, hard-working, and deeply in love, a woman will see their worth and stay. But Nietzsche forces us to ask a more painful question. What if women aren't attracted to goodness the way men think they are? What if what she truly seeks isn't your loyalty, but your resistance? What if her desire is awakened not when you offer your heart on a silver platter, but when you make her wonder if she can ever fully have you? Nietzsche wasn't interested in romantic fantasy. He was obsessed with truth, no matter how uncomfortable, and his view of human instinct, especially in love, was brutal. People don't love what they have. They crave what eludes them. And this is especially true, he believed, for most women. They don't want a man they can control. They want the challenge of a man who cannot be tamed, because conquest, not comfort, triggers the deepest part of their desire. This is not about blame, it's about instinct. The raw biological drive that predates culture. Nietzsche saw that much of what society calls love is actually a dance of power. And women, even the softest ones, are often masters at this dance. When a man becomes completely available, predictable, always ready to please, he may think he's loving correctly. But what she often feels is boredom. Desire dies in safety. Mystery fuels attraction. This is why many men give their best to a woman and lose her anyway, because the moment she senses there is no edge, no fight, no tension, something inside her quietly detaches. She may still smile, still say, "I love you," but her soul has already begun to drift. Nietzsche believed that a man must never surrender his strength in order to be loved, because the woman who truly desires him because of that strength. She doesn't want to own him. She wants to be drawn to him, and if he hands himself over too easily, the game ends, and so does the passion. It's a cruel truth, but it explains why many women ignore nice guys and obsess over distant, emotionally unavailable men. The latter resist being conquered, and that resistance triggers the ancient instinct to chase, to prove, to win. So what does she truly seek in a man? A man who stands firm in his essence, who can love but not kneel, who listens but doesn't beg, who gives but never abandons himself in the process. She seeks a man who remains a mountain even when she tries to shake him. 2. Why power doesn't always attract. You've been told that women want powerful men, that the more successful you become, the more status, strength, and money you accumulate, the more desirable you'll be. But Nietzsche would ask, is it real power or just external decoration? Because here's the paradox. Many powerful men are secretly ruled by the women in their lives. They are CEOs, politicians, warriors on the outside, and emotionally dependent, desperate lovers behind closed doors. And women feel this contrast. They smell it. No matter how grand your achievements, if your heart is trembling in her hands, she senses that weakness, and that's where the attraction begins to fade. It's not power that attracts, it's sovereignty, the ability to remain emotionally independent, to think for yourself, to walk away if needed. That's what magnetizes her. Many men use power as bait, trying to impress, to win her over. But Nietzsche would say, if you need to convince her, you've already lost her, because true power is silent. It doesn't chase, it doesn't explain itself. It chooses, and women respond to this unspoken authority far more than to loud displays of success. Let's be clear, there's nothing wrong with ambition or achievement, but when your accomplishments become your identity, and your identity depends on whether she validates it or not, you're no longer powerful. You're performing, and women can tell. She may smile, applaud, even date you for a while. But deep down, she's testing, watching, waiting for the moment your mask slips. The question she's unconsciously asking is, would he still be this man if I walked away? If the answer is no, if your strength crumbles when she withdraws, she no longer feels admiration, only control. Nietzsche believed in the power of becoming whole, not dependent, not reactive, but self-contained. And when a man reaches this level, his presence becomes intoxicating, not because he flaunts it, but because he owns it. That kind of man doesn't need to dominate, he doesn't need to beg, he just exists, and that's enough. This is why some of the most desirable men are not the loudest, richest, or most charming. They are the ones who are unmoved, not cold, but centered, and a woman, even the most independent one, feels pulled to that center, because power that doesn't try to prove itself is the most attractive force of all. 3. The hidden game behind sweetness. She smiles, she listens, she seems delicate, almost innocent, and you start to believe she's different, that this one won't hurt you, that this time you've found a woman who values your soul, not just your strength. But behind that sweetness, there's often a hidden game unfolding, a subtle strategy that Nietzsche would say is older than civilization itself. It's not that she's lying, it's that she's playing, not in a malicious way, not always, but in a deeply instinctive, almost unconscious one. And most men never see it until it's too late, because we are trained to see sweetness as safety, softness as sincerity. But Nietzsche warns, appearances are not reality. Appearances are tactics. He believed that behind every carefully constructed persona, even the most tender, lies a will to power, and in women this often manifests not through dominance or aggression, but through charm. Charm is her weapon, not brute force, not direct confrontation, but emotional finesse, subtle gestures, timed vulnerability, calculated silence. It's not always manipulative in a conscious sense, but it serves a purpose, to test your center, because what sweetness often does is invite you to drop your guard, to become soft too, to respond with more and more and more. And here's the danger Nietzsche saw. Once the man surrenders to the illusion of safety, once he believes he's found purity, loyalty, stability, he stops leading. He begins to orbit around her emotional universe. He seeks to protect, to please, to secure her affection, and in doing so, he surrenders his edge. That's when the dynamic shifts. Her sweetness turns into silence. Her warmth cools. She withdraws, slightly, and watches, and the man, confused, tries harder. He gives more, texts more, sacrifices more, because he believes the love he felt was real, and he doesn't realize that it was never love that was holding her. It was tension, mystery, the unsolved riddle of who he is. Nietzsche taught that power isn't always direct. The strongest control is the one you don't recognize, and the sweetness of a woman can be the most dangerous kind of control. because it never looks like control. It looks like care, but true care doesn't demand your submission. It doesn't collapse when you stay sovereign. It invites your presence without needing your surrender. The modern man is often too eager to believe, too quick to trust softness as truth. But real connection doesn't grow from naivety. It grows from clarity, and clarity begins by understanding. Not all sweetness is sincere. Sometimes it's a mask, a beautiful, delicate veil that hides a test. She wants to know, can you remain grounded when she disarms you? Can you hold your truth when she offers hers with tears in her eyes? Can you stay whole, even when she makes you feel like the only man in the world? Because that's the real challenge, not resisting anger, not defending against attack, but staying centered in the presence of sweetness that slowly invites you to dissolve. Nietzsche believed that most men are conquered not by rage, but by seduction, not just sexual seduction, emotional seduction, the kind that feels like love, but is rooted in power. So what's the answer? Not fear, not distance, but awareness, to recognize when you are being pulled out of yourself, to know the difference between genuine affection and strategic softness, to feel when her sweetness becomes a mirror, reflecting back not who she is, but who she wants you to become. And in that moment, you must choose, not between love and detachment, but between truth and illusion. The truth is, a woman's sweetness is beautiful, but only when it's real, when it flows without agenda, when it doesn't crumble the moment you stop performing. But the illusion, the one Nietzsche warned about, is the kind that flatters your ego, feeds your hope, and then quietly drains your will. Because the moment you abandon yourself to please her softness, you lose what made you attractive in the first place, your independence, your mystery, your direction. Remember, no one follows a man who stops moving, and no woman, no matter how sweet, stays devoted to a man who forgets who he is. So watch the sweetness, not with suspicion, but with depth. See if it draws you closer or pulls you away from yourself. Because the hidden game behind sweetness isn't about her. It's about you, and whether you can remain unshaken in the face of the most seductive force on earth. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 4. Her need to feel above you. There is a hidden truth that most men are too afraid to admit, and most women would never say out loud. Many women don't just want to love a man, they want to feel above him, not in the beginning, not while they're still intrigued, but once they've won your attention, once they know you're emotionally invested. That's when the shift begins. Nietzsche didn't believe in the fairy tale of equality and desire. He believed that every relationship is a power dynamic, and someone always tries to rise above the other, even if it's done with a soft smile. At first, the game is attraction, but once you're hers, the real game becomes hierarchy, and for many women, especially those unaware of their own unconscious drives, there's a subtle but powerful instinct to rise, even above the man they once admired, not necessarily out of cruelty, but out of insecurity, because being beneath a man, especially one who is deeply grounded and self-directed, can awaken her most primal fear, being insignificant. So she starts to test, not through open disrespect, but through tiny shifts. Suddenly, your ideas don't sound so brilliant, your decisions are questioned softly at first. Your habits, once admired, are now framed as flaws to be fixed. And the man, if he doesn't see it, starts to adapt. He explains more, justifies more, apologizes more. He gives up pieces of his authority in the name of keeping the peace. But it's not peace he's creating. It's quiet submission, and once she senses she's now above him, emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually, she loses something essential: respect. Nietzsche warned, "He who cannot command himself must be commanded." And in relationships, the man who gives up his position of inner leadership doesn't just lose control, he loses attraction. Because despite what culture tells you, most women do not stay loyal to men they no longer respect. She may stay physically present. She may still say the right words, but her eyes change, her tone shifts, and most of all, her admiration dies. This is where Nietzsche's brilliance strikes. He didn't reduce this to female nature or feminism or any ideology. He saw it as a truth rooted in the human will to power. We are all driven to avoid feeling inferior. And when a woman is with a man who doesn't stand firm in his being, who shrinks to accommodate her, who becomes emotionally obedient, she feels superior, not because she is, but because he allowed it, and that dynamic kills desire. You don't have to yell, you don't have to dominate. That's not the point, but you must never let go of your vertical posture, your spiritual spine. Because once she senses you are looking up to her for guidance, validation, or emotional permission, she'll begin to look down, and the love will sour into contempt. This is not about ego. It's about energy. A woman falls in love with a man because she feels safe in his presence, not just physically, but energetically, safe that he knows himself, safe that he can walk with or without her. Safe that his direction is not up for negotiation. But the moment you give that away to prove how devoted you are, she feels the balance shift. She may not say it. She may not even understand it. But deep down, she'll feel it. I'm above him now. And that kills polarity. Nietzsche wasn't cold toward women. He was honest. He understood that this need to feel superior in many cases doesn't come from arrogance, but from the feminine fear of vulnerability. Because to truly follow a man means surrendering, not blindly but energetically. And that's terrifying for many women in a world that teaches them never to depend on anyone. So they reverse the game. Instead of trusting you, they test you. Instead of admiring your strength, they compete with it. And once they win that competition, once they emotionally dominate you, they grow resentful. Not because you hurt them, but because you stop being the man they could lean on. And in Nietzsche's eyes, the tragedy of modern love is this. Men are trained to give more and more to prove their love, while women silently begin to hate them for it. So what do? You rise, not above her, but above yourself. You stay rooted in your values. You stop explaining your every thought. You let her misunderstand you sometimes, and that's okay. Because the man who needs to be perfectly understood has already given away his power. Let her feel what she wants. Let her process her own emotions. You don't need to manage her world. You only need to master your own, because a woman doesn't truly want to be above you. She wants to feel your height, even if she tries to pull you down. And in the end, the man who stands tall without shouting, who leads without controlling, who loves without submitting, becomes unforgettable. Not because he fought her, but because he never fought himself. 5. Control wrapped in fragility. She looks fragile. She speaks softly. She cries. She trembles. She says she's scared of losing you. And in that moment you feel like the strong one. You hold her. You reassure her. You promise you'll never leave. You make her feel safe. But what if, in that exact moment, she's the one controlling you? Nietzsche would argue that power doesn't always come dressed in confidence. Sometimes power wears a trembling voice and a tear-stained face. Because real control, he believed, often appears as weakness. Why? Because when someone looks weak, you drop your defenses. You become softer, more forgiving, more open. You begin to serve them emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually, without realizing it. And when it comes to relationships, This is one of the most dangerous dynamics a man can fall into, mistaking emotional fragility for purity. Nietzsche wrote often about the masks people wear, not to deceive maliciously, but to survive, to influence, to win. And he knew women, especially those disconnected from their deeper strength, often learn to use vulnerability as a form of leverage. Not because they're evil, but because they realize it works. She doesn't have to argue. She doesn't have to threaten. She just has to break in front of you, and instantly you shift. You stop thinking clearly. You forget your boundaries. You say yes to things that violate your integrity because you don't want to hurt her. You stay quiet when something feels off because she's already going through so much. You become a caretaker, not a man, and the more you accommodate her fragility, the more she tests the limits of your tolerance. She cancels plans. She withdraws. She becomes passive-aggressive. She cries without saying why, and each time you soften further, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being too harsh. Fear of hurting her feelings. Fear of being seen as the bad guy. But here's the harsh truth Nietzsche would shout if he were alive today. You cannot protect a woman from herself. And if she uses her fragility to bend your will, you're no longer in a relationship. You're under emotional rule. This kind of control is invisible. It doesn't scream. It doesn't dominate. It asks. It trembles. It makes you feel like the savior, while you're slowly becoming the prisoner. You stop living by your truth. You start walking on eggshells, and you convince yourself that this is love. But love doesn't suffocate. Love doesn't guilt you into silence. Love doesn't hide behind weakness to get its way. Nietzsche's philosophy demands we look beneath the surface, that we see behavior not as words or appearances, but as will. So ask yourself, what does she gain from breaking down? Does her sadness bring you closer? Does her panic change your plans? Does her silence make you pursue her harder? Then maybe, just maybe, the fragility isn't accidental. Maybe it's a survival strategy, a way to control you without ever looking like the one in control. And the cost: you lose your center. You become reactive. You forget your mission. You begin to measure your words, your tone, your presence, all in the name of protecting someone who might be using her tears to shape your behavior. This is not to say all emotion is manipulation. Of course not. Real pain exists. Real trauma exists. But Nietzsche would challenge you to ask, is this pain leading to truth or obedience? And if it's the second, you are being ruled. A man who walks through life constantly adjusting to the emotional storms of others is not compassionate. He is enslaved. Compassion is when you offer strength. Slavery is when you sacrifice your strength to avoid discomfort. One nourishes love, the other feeds resentment, because eventually you'll feel it. That creeping anger, that quiet frustration, the voice inside you that whispers, "Why do I always have to carry everything?" And that voice is right. You were never meant to carry her emotions and your integrity at the same time. Nietzsche would tell you, let her break, let her feel, let her cry. But never let her pain become your compass. Never let her fragility decide your truth. You are not cruel for standing firm. You are not cold for saying no. You are not heartless for maintaining your structure in the face of her collapse. In fact, that's what she truly needs. Not a man who dissolves when she does, but a man who remains unmoved, not because he doesn't care, but because he knows who he is, and from that stillness real healing can begin. Because eventually, even she will realize a man who doesn't fall for her emotional games is the only one strong enough to love her without conditions. 6. The myth of the supportive woman. Modern culture often sells the image of the supportive woman as an ideal partner, Someone who will stand by a man through anything, offering encouragement, loyalty, and unwavering admiration. From fairy tales to motivational quotes, we are told that behind every great man, there is a great woman. But Nietzsche would challenge that idea sharply, not because he didn't believe women were capable of support, but because he understood something darker. Support is conditional, and many women do not admire greatness unless it serves them directly. At the beginning of a relationship, admiration often flows freely. A woman sees a man's confidence, his potential, his ambition, and she becomes drawn to him, not because he's already perfect, but because he's in motion. In that early phase, she appears encouraging. She asks questions about his goals. She tells him he's different. She gives him the impression that she'll be there no matter what. But Nietzsche would warn. Once the admiration becomes familiarity, everything changes. The same qualities she once praised may begin to irritate her. His focus on his mission becomes emotional distance. His ambition becomes selfishness. His discipline becomes coldness. Why? Because deep down, the supportive role was never about him. It was about what he could offer her. As long as she felt connected to the rewards of his journey, she would cheer him on. But the moment his journey required her patience, her silence, or her discomfort, the support turned into resistance. Nietzsche believed that most people do not truly want others to succeed, especially if that success means becoming independent from their validation. And this applies powerfully in relationships. A woman may say she wants her man to rise, to conquer, to become powerful, but if that power makes him emotionally self-sufficient, if he no longer needs her approval, if his world continues to expand while hers feels left behind, resentment quietly replaces admiration. The supportive woman becomes a myth when her support depends on proximity and control. She wants to walk beside the man, but not if he walks too far ahead. She wants him to grow, but only in ways that still include her at the center. Nietzsche would call this a disguised form of domination, not through authority, but through emotional positioning. The woman remains loving, but her love now carries demands. She begins to sabotage, slowly and subtly, with comments that sound like concern, but are really judgments. You work too much. You never make time for me anymore. You've changed. Of course he has changed. He's evolving, he's building. But what she's really saying is, you're no longer revolving around me. This is the hidden cost of becoming a man of purpose. Not every woman will tolerate being second to your mission. Some will pretend to support you, but secretly hope you fail, not out of hatred, but out of fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of losing influence, fear of becoming invisible. Nietzsche's philosophy doesn't romanticize human nature. He exposes it. He understood that love often comes with conditions, even if they are unspoken. A woman's support is not guaranteed just because she once admired you. It must be earned, not through sacrifice, but through your refusal to shrink. The man who slows down to keep her comfortable eventually becomes unrecognizable to her. She'll say, "You're not the man I fell in love with." And she's right. He's not. He became smaller to stay close to her. He gave up his edge to keep her smiling. He buried his hunger to avoid conflict, and now she no longer respects him. True support is rare. It doesn't look like applause when things are easy. It looks like silence when things are hard. It looks like letting the man lead, even when it's uncomfortable. It looks like trusting his direction, not because it's perfect, but because he is strong enough to choose it. And very few women can do that consistently. This is not about blaming women. It's about waking men up. If your identity depends on her support, you're already lost. If you need her validation to move forward, your mission is no longer yours. If you slow down every time she complains, then she, not you, leads the relationship. Whether she realizes it or not, Nietzsche would say, Walk anyway, lead anyway, grow anyway, and if she leaves, let her. Because the woman who cannot support your rise without needing to feel in control of it will always sabotage it eventually. In truth, the most supportive woman is not the one who praises you constantly. It's the one who stays out of your way, the one who doesn't pull you off your path, the one who admires you from a distance, not because she's excluded, but because she respects your rhythm more than her emotional impulses. And until a man learns to walk without applause, he will remain dependent on approval. Nietzsche taught that greatness demands isolation. The higher you climb, the thinner the air, and the fewer the people who can breathe beside you. That includes women, especially women. So before you believe she's your support system, ask yourself, would she still be there if you had nothing to offer her? Would she still admire you if your strength didn't bend to her moods? Would she still follow if you stopped explaining yourself? If the answer is no, then the support is not real, and neither is the relationship. 7. When admiration turns to contempt. One of the most painful shifts a man can experience in a relationship is when the admiration in a woman's eyes slowly fades and is replaced with something colder, sharper, and far more difficult to name: contempt. At first, everything seemed perfect. She looked at you with awe. She listened when you spoke. She laughed at your jokes. She said she was proud of you. You felt seen. You felt like a man, like someone worth following. But then, something subtle started to change. Not overnight, but gradually. The compliments became less frequent. The tone became more critical. The warmth in her gaze turned distant. And when you tried to get back what you once had, she responded with irritation, or worse, indifference. This moment confuses many men. They think they did something wrong. They try to fix it by being more attentive, more affectionate, more available. But it doesn't work. In fact, it often makes things worse. Because what they don't realize is that what she once admired is no longer present. Not because it disappeared, but because the man buried it himself. Nietzsche understood this dynamic clearly. In his view, admiration from others is not something you keep by pleasing them. It is something you command by staying true to your higher self. The moment you begin to prioritize their comfort over your integrity, you invite disrespect. And when it comes to women, this is especially true. Many women admire a man at first because he is untamed, ambitious, emotionally self-sufficient. He has direction, purpose, even a little danger in his energy. That draws her in, it excites her. But once the relationship deepens and she realizes that this man cannot be easily molded, she may begin to resist it. She tests him. She questions his priorities. She demands more time, more emotion, more sensitivity. At first, he resists, but eventually, if he fears losing her, he begins to shift. He compromises, he softens, he stops pursuing his own path with the same focus, and starts managing her emotional needs instead. This is when the contempt begins to grow. She may not even understand why she's feeling it. She might say things like, "You've changed," or "I miss how things used to be." But what she really means is, "I no longer feel the presence of the man I once looked up to." Because here's the brutal truth. Many women don't fall out of love because a man fails them. They fall out of love because he stops challenging them emotionally. He becomes predictable. He becomes soft. He becomes too available, too emotionally entangled, too reactive. And instead of inspiring her, he begins to drain her. Nietzsche believed that contempt arises when someone perceives weakness where there was once strength. And for a woman, the moment she no longer feels that a man is above her in spirit, she begins to push him down even further. She may correct him in public. She may speak to him with sarcasm or passive aggression. She may withdraw sexually, not out of cruelty, but because something in her no longer feels drawn to his essence. She begins to see him not as a leader, not as a man she wants to follow. but as someone she must now manage, fix, or tolerate. This is the harsh reality most men refuse to face. You cannot earn back admiration by chasing it. You cannot convince a woman to desire you again by apologizing for your strength. You cannot rebuild attraction by becoming nicer. The only way to reverse contempt, if it's still possible, is to return to your center, to stop proving yourself, to stop over-explaining, to reconnect with your mission, your silence, your independence, to let her feel the distance she once tried to eliminate, the very distance that made her respect you in the first place. Nietzsche taught that resentment is the shadow of disappointed expectations. When a woman expects you to remain strong, and you slowly become domesticated by her moods, she feels betrayed, even if she was the one who demanded the change. She resents what you've become, because she no longer recognizes what she once admired. This is why some women leave stable, perfect relationships and run toward chaos. It's not always immaturity. It's a craving to feel something real again, even if that reality is dangerous or unstable. And the irony is painful. The man she now chases may have less to offer, but he possesses the one thing she can't manufacture: emotional sovereignty. So what does a man do when admiration turns to contempt? First, he stops negotiating his value. He stops chasing conversations that go nowhere. He stops begging to be seen. He stops performing to keep the peace. Instead, he begins to live again, not for her reaction, but for his truth. He reconnects with what made him magnetic before the relationship began: his hunger, his discipline, his silence, his self-possession. He becomes a man she doesn't own. And that, more than anything, might be the one thing that awakens her respect again. But even if it doesn't, he must continue anyway, because Nietzsche's warning is clear. Once contempt enters the heart, it's nearly impossible to remove, unless the man becomes someone she must rise to meet again, and, if not her, another will, one who is still capable of admiration. So now you've seen what few dare to say, that behind the smile, the softness, the sweetness, there can exist something ancient, something instinctive, something Nietzsche never feared to name: the will to power, not just in men, but in women too, and perhaps that's the greatest shock. Not that women are manipulative or cold or cruel. No, that's not what this is about. It's that many of them don't even know how deeply. They're driven by invisible forces. She thinks she wants love, but she chases conquest. She says she wants stability, but she desires the emotional chaos of chasing what she can't fully have. She admires strength until it reminds her of her own fragility. She begs for closeness. But once she gets it, she pushes it away, and the man, unaware of these instincts, breaks himself trying to make her happy, only to realize she no longer wants what he became. Nietzsche didn't hate women. He respected the truth of nature. And nature, when denied, becomes dangerous. That's why most relationships fail, not because of betrayal, but because of illusion. So, the question now is not about her. It's about you. Can you stay true to who you are, even when you're being tested by love that feels real, but behaves like a mirror? Can you walk away, not in anger, but in clarity, when you realize that her admiration has quietly turned to resentment? Can you love deeply and still never kneel? That's the modern man's challenge. And maybe, just maybe, the rare woman is not the one who never tests your strength, but the one who sees it, respects it, and never asks you to trade it for her comfort. Think about that, and ask yourself, in your last relationship, were you really loved, or were you slowly being tamed? Let that question echo, and if it stings, you're finally waking up. Now scroll down and tell me what part of this truth hit you hardest. I'm listening.